So the first subunit, as you would know, is division of labor. So let's look at what we have in division of labor. We have these questions in relation to division of labor. Now, Durkheim argued that society is more than the sum of its individuals or individual acts, discussed 2022. Critically examine how Durkheim and Merton explicate. They talk about anomie. How well do you think Ferdinand Tönnies, Emile Durkheim and Weber, Marx predicted the character of modern society? There's a spelling mistake here. It's not Max, it's Marx. Then explain whether Durkheim's theory of division of labor is relevant in the present day context. Compare Karl Marx with Emile Durkheim with reference to the framework of division of labor. So as you can figure it out, not only UPSC asks questions particularly from Durkheim, and this is the case across thinkers, UPSC would also want you to draw comparisons between different thinkers. So Marx and Durkheim, Marx and Weber, Durkheim and Weber, Durkheim and Merton, Parsons and Merton, you never know. You can have all kinds of combinations and permutations. And particularly here is a question where you have as many as 4 thinkers: Ferdinand Tönnies, Gemeinschaft to Gesellschaft, Durkheim from mechanical solidarity to organic solidarity, Max Weber from, let's say, in terms of systems of authority, from traditional and charismatic, but particularly traditional to rational legal, and then Marx, mode of production, from feudalism to capitalism. So you can very well figure it out that how UPSC is not only asking about the particular thinker, but once in a while is also interested in seeking your interventions in terms of the comparison between the thinkers. So these are some of the things that we need to think about. All right, so let's begin with the first question. Durkheim argued that society is more than the sum of individual acts or sum of individuals, either ways. Now, Durkheim, remember, in most of his writings, in fact, the 4 important writings that we have: division of labor in society, rules of sociological method, suicide, and elementary forms of religious life. In each of these, Durkheim is insisting that any sociological analysis cannot afford to start with the individual act or the individual. The society is has an independent existence. Its existence has got nothing to do with the individual. It is a priori. It predates the individual. So in that regard, Durkheim speaks about a range of important references. For example, if you think about this reference, solidarity. Now, solidarity as a reference, social solidarity, is something that informs us how a sociological analysis must go beyond the individual. A sociological analysis should not start with the individual. So the social solidarity reference is something that we find in division of labor, right? So that is the first thing, social solidarity. So if you're looking at social solidarity, right? So that is one. Social solidarity. Then in addition to that, Durkheim, division of labor, social solidarity. That informs us how the society is more than the individual. You come to rules of sociological method, that's the second pointer. In rules of sociological method, Durkheim categorically points out that sociology must not concern itself with the study of individual facts or psychological facts. It must study social facts. Now, social facts are collective ways of thinking, acting, and feeling. They are constraining, they are exterior to the individual, they are independent, and they are general. They are found throughout society. So that is the social fact bit, right? So that's another thing. So the social fact is, of course, more than the individual acts. Then the third work, which is suicide. Once again, Durkheim is not interested in studying suicide from the vantage point of individual, and which is where he makes a very, very important remark, and you must take a note of it, that Durkheim insists that in sociology, we must make a difference between what he calls the incidence of suicide, which is to do with the individual, and the rate of suicide, which is to do with the social forces and factors. And he says a sociological study of suicide, or if suicide is to be understood as a social fact, then we must look at suicide in terms of rate and not in terms of incidence. So the famous distinction between incidence and rate. So the incidence of suicide and the rate of suicide. And then in the last work of his, elementary forms of religious life. Once again, when he is discussing religion, he does not want to look at religion once again as a result of or as an expression of individual devotion, individual commitment, etc. That is not to be found in his definition. When he talks about religion, he talks about collective representation, he talks about collective effervescence, he talks about sacred, he talks about profane. And it is through these references, once again, you begin to understand that religion is a social fact and religion is a certain kind of a social sentiment. So Durkheim is very clear that the individual act is not necessarily the individual act of devotion, or the individual sentiment of faith is not really something that is going to help us very much. So these are some of the ways in which, or these are some of the pointers, and I'm particularly borrowing from 4 important works of his: Division of Labor in Society, Rules of Sociological Method, Suicide, and Elementary Forms of Religious Life. So this should be of great help if you're talking about how Durkheim is of the opinion that the society is more than the sum of individual acts. Let's move further. So this is something that's clear, right? Collective consciousness, collective effervescence, social solidarity, sacred, profane, etc. All of this essentially tells us that Durkheim invariably placed the society as something that was more than the individuals, the sum of the individuals, or more than the sum of individual acts. Let's come to the second one. How Durkheim and Merton explicate anomie. Now, for Durkheim, anomie is essentially a situation of normlessness, right? And it is not something that Durkheim considers as normal. Anomie is something that Durkheim is not very happy about, right? So he talks about anomie in Division of Labor, and he talks about how a certain kind of normlessness is to be understood as anomie. So it is a pathological thing for Durkheim. Whereas for Merton, and of course we are going to discuss it when we look at Merton's conformity and deviance subsection in some later video. When Merton talks about anomie, Merton looks at anomie in the context of culture and structure interface. So he does not look at anomie as something that is a pathology, but he looks at it in terms of the larger social infrastructure and the ways in which the culturally identified goals and the institutionally available means, the culture and structure come together. So more on this when we look at Merton. The next one, how well do you think Tony's, Durkheim, Weber, and Marx predicted the character? So this is MARX, predicted the character of modern society. So here again, we have to simply talk about, and this is, yeah, it's of course, well, it's a 10 marker. So this is it's a short note. So you have to simply talk about what these people were referring to. So we talk about Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft in relation to Ferdinand Tönnies. We talk about mechanical solidarity to organic solidarity for Durkheim. We talk about traditional authority to rational legal in relation to Weber, and we talk about feudalism to capitalism in relation to. So basically, each of these were looking at modernity as some kind of an experience, a new social experience. Now for Durkheim, this new social experience was in terms of solidarity and the ways in which division of labor was carried out in society from one phase to another. For Weber, it was about the society's, the presence of authority structures and how the requirement of a certain authority structure varied as we moved or changed as we moved from pre-modern to modern society. Marx is particularly talking about how as we move from feudalism to capitalism, or as we move from medieval or Middle Ages Europe to modern Europe, how the mode of production changes because the ways in which human beings or workers are engaging with nature has changed. The technological know-how has changed a great deal, labor has become more specialized, and the scale of production has gone up. So these are basically looking, each of these thinkers, Ferdinand Tönnies is talking about Gemeinschaft, which could be considered as some kind of a community thing, to Gesellschaft, which could be considered as society association. So Tönnies is also very clear that earlier we had more of allegiance or association around the idea of ascription, around the idea of community, around the idea of blood ties, kinship, etc. But as we go from there to Gesellschaft, which is to do with achievement, which is to do with merit, which is to do with let's say, performance, etc., etc. And as you would already know, Talcott-Parsons pattern variables AP is very much informed by, or shall we say, it's influenced by the likes of Ferdinand Tönnies, the scheme Gemeinschaft to Gesellschaft. So that's about this particular question. Explain whether Durkheim's theory of division of labor is relevant in the present day context. Well, if we are looking at, so now if we are talking about division of labor in society, remember, wherever you have this question, you must not forget to talk about how division of labor is fundamentally an important sociological intervention. And through this particular work, which came out in 1893, Durkheim was trying to put on record a sociological reading of a theme that was already claimed by economists. So what Durkheim is trying to do is, he's trying to tell us that division of labor is not to be understood the way Adam Smith would have us believe. Because Adam Smith already has given an understanding of division of labor, and of course it is well received, it is well consumed. But what Durkheim is doing is, he's saying, well, that's for economics people, or that's for those who want to understand division of labor from the vantage point of economics. We want to understand division of labor as per our own disciplinary terms. So we are sociologists, we will look at division of labor from the vantage point of sociology. And it is in this regard that he does not talk about division of labor in terms of division and people working on different aspects, and as a result of which collectively contributing to a certain efficiency, something that broadly Adam Smith refers to. Of course, there's more to it, but we don't want to go into the details. Durkheim brings in the whole idea of social bonds and linkages. So the bonds that are there between individuals, or the links that are there between individuals, and the bond that individuals have with society, and how the nature of all this changes as society moves from the primitive, the simple, the pre-modern, the pre-industrial, to the modern, to the industrial, or to the complex. So this is something that Durkheim is talking about. So we have to keep this in mind every time we are referring to division of labor. It's quite surprising that students, aspirants do not write about this very important thing, that the work was done so as to put on record a sociological reading of division of labor, as opposed to one that is produced by, or that is endorsed by, economics as a discipline. So the work came out in 1893. It is considered as sociology's first classic, meaning it is the first book wherein a proper sociological analysis or a sociological theorizing of a very important phenomenon is to be put forth. So he wants to make a distinction between social division of labor and economic division of labor. So please keep this in mind. And in that regard, he wants to look into the nature of the social links that connect individuals and the nature of the social bonds that connect individuals with the rest of the society. And he also wants to know that as society moves from one stage to another, as society graduates, as society progresses, what happens to these bonds and linkages that exist between individuals and between individuals and society. So this is, now to what extent is it relevant? Now one could say that of course it is considered as a very, very important work, but there are a few questions that still remain very, very particular about division of labor's relevance in the times we live in. So in this particular question, there's no need to get into mechanical, organic, etc., etc. I think we straight away need to come to, and there are of course within division of labor possibilities of other short notes. So you need to be very much prepared for that. For example, there can always be a short note on collective representation. There can always be a short note on collective conscience. There can always be a short note on, of course, mechanical and organic is something that we are well aware of, but you never know. Or in general, collective consciousness, collective conscience, collective representations. Now, these are things that we need to remain aware of. Now, when it comes to the criticism, there are 2-3 things that can always be pointed out. One is that in the context of division of labor, Durkheim is so obsessed with, or shall we say, he's so preoccupied with the idea of solidarity that he completely neglects various other very important parameters on the basis of which division of labor actually is worked out, or it gets operationalized in the society. So for example, from a country like India, one can always look at the question of caste, and to what extent Durkheim really takes up these questions: the question of race, the question of caste, the question of ethnicity, and of course the question of gender. And this is something that Durkheim does not necessarily draw our attention to. Similarly, what is also very important is that in division of labor, Durkheim draws a very, very important connection between the nature of solidarity, which is, let's say, mechanical or organic, and the system of law that exists. So, for example, in relation to mechanical solidarity, Durkheim actually talks about penal law, right, and repressive sanctions. In relation to organic solidarity, Durkheim talks about contract law and restitutive sanctions. Now here, of course, these are very important connections, but to what extent is division of labor relevant today? One can point out that these connections are not that clearly visible in the societies we live in. So for example, the society we live in is of course characterized by organic solidarity, but then in this society we also see instances of what we call repressive sanctions. So individuals actually still unfortunately carry within them a certain kind of a pre-modern instinct to take revenge or to settle the scores. So we still find a lot of people in India, for example, who believe that law takes a lot of time, and actually the culprits should be handed over to the public, and the public should simply lynch them, or the public should simply stone them to death, or they should be hanged, they should be shot dead in public, etc., or before the public, sorry, not in public. So now these are, what kind of sentiment is this? If you look at the Durkheimian theory, this is not a modern sentiment, because in the modern world characterized by organic solidarity, we have restitutive sanctions, we have contract law, and we do not really have penal law or repressive sanctions. So and then one can also point out that division of labor does not look at the question of power, which is of course a major fallacy. Sorry, it's a major inadequacy. It's a major failing on the part of the theory. The gender question, as I pointed out, is totally missing. The question of marginalization is missing. So we really don't know to what extent division of labor is that relevant in the times we live in. Durkheim is also not concerned about the negative effects of the dependencies created by the division of labor. So whatever interdependencies are there, Durkheim simply believes that these interdependences actually create or produce solidarity. But what he completely neglects is that interdependence can also create subservience, it can create marginalization, and it can always have a negative side to it. So these are some of the pointers that you can always have. And the linkage between law, solidarity, and society is something that does not come out very clearly in the modern society. So these are some of the pointers that you can always work with. Compare Karl Marx with Emile Durkheim with reference to the framework of division of labor. I think this is as clear as it can be. Well, for division of labor, for Durkheim, division of labor, we are absolutely clear. Now for Marx, division of labor is something that is absolutely unacceptable. Marx does not believe that division of labor really contributes to solidarity. For him, division of labor is essentially something that is not right. And according to Marx, something needs to be done about it. Why does Marx believe in it? So this idea that these people are going to work and these people will simply hire other people to work. So that's division of labor for the most part. There are those who will labor and there are those who won't. Now, division of labor, according to Marx, is exploitative. It is repressive. So in capitalism, there is, of course, division of labor, but Marx is not at all happy about it. And Marx is very much clear about the fact that only a radical restructuring or a revolutionary transformation can actually offer some solace to us. Otherwise, we are done as a society or as a species. So for Marx, division of labor is something that is pathological. It is something that we need to do something about. It is something that we really cannot go ahead with. So Marx is very clear. It is pathological. It is not good. It is something that is against the interests of the workers, and it is something that is always beneficial for a specific class, which is the haves. Whereas for Durkheim, of course, it is not really the case, but there is one specific situation wherein Durkheim also points out, which is called forced division of labor. So that could be your concluding argument. In the conclusion paragraph, you can always use it, that when it comes to forced division of labor, and Durkheim speaks about it, forced division of labor is where Durkheim and Marx are very close to each other, because Durkheim is pointing out that in forced division of labor, a particular individual is simply pushed into a certain role which might not be meant for him or her. Now, Marx is also talking about labor as something that is forced, that is coerced, and as a result of that, it leads to alienation, or this thing called estrangement, and so on. So these are some of the pointers that you can always make use of.